Good afternoon, everybody, and maybe just introduction to myself and to the rest of the meeting. I'm Dirk Eys, and I'm responsible for research and innovation at Potato South Africa. And the idea is that we would like to share some stuff around potatoes. And I think being a CropLife event, obviously it's important to focus on topics related to pests and diseases, and I think general crop production efficiencies. So it's really great to share the platform with you. So what we'll do is I will start just giving a brief introduction on where we believe the potato industry can go. As you know, potatoes probably is one of the top spenders on crop protection products on all the crops in South Africa. I think it's just table grapes that might be more expensive on a hectare. And then I'll hand over to FPA, my colleague who's responsible for the information side in Potato South Africa. And I think it might be valuable for you just to see where are all the potatoes in South Africa, when do they come into production, and just some general economic stats around the different regions. And then we thought of maybe focusing on two important issues in the potato industry. The first being this new, the hot topic, pepper ring spot virus. So it's really nice to have Dr. Lindy Esterhuizen with us. She's from the ARC and the virologist there. And I think it's really great that she can share some of the work that she's done on pepper ring spot to date. And I think it's also a good opportunity for her to meet the crop protection industry, because I think it's very important that we work together, particularly in monitoring where this disease is. So nice to have you on board, Lindy. And then lastly, Professor Martin Steyn from the University of Pretoria will share some of the work that he's been doing. I think everybody knows Martin. He's done a lot of work on, first of all, irrigation, but also on the agronomic side of potatoes, the fertilization side, the efficiency side, and integrating all this together. So it's nice to maybe just see some of the work that he's done and some of the conclusions that he's made over the years. So I think, Elriza, you've allocated us about 2 hours. I believe we'll probably take about an hour and a half, and hopefully there'll be some time for discussion afterwards. And I think your suggestion was to keep the questions for the end, if that's okay with everybody, and obviously putting it into the chat box. So then maybe just to kick off, and it's actually quite interesting. We all know potatoes has originated from South America, but what I didn't realize is that potatoes was actually not really accepted by many people, and there's some, probably the first marketing case was when Kaiser Frederick tried to position potatoes into Prussia, which is now Germany, and his people, he was running into a bit of a problem because everybody was eating wheat, and he found that, first of all, there was only so much wheat. He had to run a war, and he needed some alternatives with products which had a bit more vitamins and a bit more nutrition than wheat. And so he tried to feed this to his people. And this quote says, they saw this thing as having neither smell or taste, and not even dogs would eat them. So what use are these things to us? So he came up with quite a cunning plan by planting potatoes in his royal gardens, getting some soldiers to sort of look after it, but he said, don't look after them too well. And then the perception was created, well, if the king of Prussia was prepared to put soldiers to protect these potatoes, then there must be value to that. And that's really what changed potatoes in Europe. And I think it was quite a strategic move at the time to position potatoes as a product, really to support the people and provide good, healthy meals to them as alternatives to wheat. So yeah, so it's quite an interesting start for that. And if you're ever in Germany, there's actually You can even go and visit his gravestone and make a wish there for potatoes. But I think for me, the important thing of potatoes is the diversity about potatoes. And I think everybody knows about the great potato, the Irish potato famine in Ireland, and the impact of late blight at the time. But something that I really take out of this story, and you know the history there, but if we look at what happened there and what was the reason for this, and I think there's two main causes. The one is that there was a lot of people planted potatoes at the time, and there was a variety that everybody planted the same variety. And obviously this variety was susceptible to late blight, causing quite a lot of problems. And I think the lesson there is, for potatoes, we definitely need diversity in your varieties you're planting, the types of potato planting. And if I had to use the example of maize, I don't think there's one maize farmer that plants one variety of maize. So for me, it's quite important that we do try and promote diversity in potato production by looking at different cultivars. And in that way, hopefully, we could reduce diseases a bit, just spreading the risk. And we could touch on that a bit later on. So maybe just some facts just to put you into the picture where we are in the world of potatoes. If we look at potato consumption throughout the world, the top potato eating nations is the people in Europe. The Netherlands is by far the leaders, but that is also probably due to the fact that a lot of potatoes are imported through the Netherlands. But and then a country like Kazakhstan produces a hell of a lot of potatoes, as does Poland. I think the Polish probably make vodka out of it, but yeah, those are the top eating countries. What's important for me in this slide is the South African consumption comes in at 35 kilograms per person per year. And if we compare ourselves, if we look at those yellow graphs, we are actually under eating in potatoes compared to countries with similar economies like Egypt, Argentina, Turkey, and even Malawi. They eat in the vicinity of 50 kilograms and more per year. So I think there is definitely an opportunity for growth in the potato consumption in this country. The top consuming country in Africa, interestingly, is Algeria, with over 100 kilograms. So there's a way to go for us. And you can see this in the figure. If we look at the beef up figure, over the last few years, potato consumption has dropped. There's probably many reasons for that. I think the economy is one, but it's also maybe how we count people, and we know that we got 62 million people in the country, but there's probably another 8 or so million people that that are not really counted for. But yeah, so we, from Potato South Africa side, we really want to change this trend, and see if we can increase production. And I'll maybe in the next slide, I really want to show you how. But I think an important point here is that as South Africans, our growers, and if Pierre will talk about the figures a bit later on, but we've got about 550 growers in this country, and these guys really know how to grow potatoes. Those of you who work in potatoes probably know that very well. And it's good to see that we are on the top performing side of potato production in the world. We coming in at about 49 tons per hectare. So it's basically just the Netherlands and Portugal that really beats us, if we look at these figures. So we got some good farmers, and that's good to know. So maybe to look at the future, where can we go with potatoes? And I came across some work. Many of you probably know Professor Hammes, who was at University of Pretoria. I think he taught people like Martin Steyn. When he was around, we were only eating 25 kilograms per person per year. Our production was 0.6 million tons at the time on 21,000 hectares. 50 years later, we are now 35, 36 kilograms per person. We've grown potatoes to 2.5 million tons production on 52,000 hectares and at 49 tons per hectare. So we've come away, and I think that's due to many things, and I think the role of the crop protection industry should also be acknowledged here in getting the yields up. Question is, where can we go to? So just a quick sum, we say if every South African eats 1 potato per week more, so you've all got a job this weekend, then we can grow the industry to increase the consumption to about 50 kilograms per person. And that'll mean growing the industry to 3.2 million tons from 2.5 million tons and increasing the hectares by 3,000 to 4,000 hectares, assuming that the yields will also go up. And I think Martin will also be touching on that a bit later on, the whole thing about yields. So I think there is opportunities, and I think for you as a crop protection industry, that I think it's good that we do have people supporting potatoes, and I think we need to recognize CropLife here and its members. So just briefly, from a research point of view, where are our focus areas? So we got 4 key focus areas. The first one is new uses for potatoes, particularly lower grade potatoes. The second one is how do we use data to make better decisions? Then the third one is soil ecology, and a lot of Martin specifically is doing a lot of work on soil health, and particularly with the pressure on some of the nematicides. This is becoming very, very important. How do we control these soil diseases? Because we're really selling a skin, and the chemical options are really becoming limited, and maybe a big concern that we see, and it's maybe something we can discuss a bit later on. And then the third one is shelf life and quality. How do we improve the quality so that we can start sending potatoes to further places and keeping it for longer? So the important issues that we have identified that really needs focus for us at this stage, and a lot of our research is looking at these 6 topics. The first one is tuber moth over the last season has been a big issue, and I'm going to share just 1 or 2 slides. And many of you might have seen the work done by Professor Annelien du Plessis at Northwest University, where she did work on a sensitivity shift. So I think we could spend a second or 2 on that. Soft rot, particularly in Natal, Eastern Free State, and the Highveld, was a big problem over the last year, mainly due to the wet initial part of the season, followed by that high spell. And I don't think there's much you can spray for that, but I think good crop husbandry has got an effect there. Then pepper ring spot, which Lindy will be touching on. The fourth one is water quality. So if you just look at what's happening to some of the rivers and stuff in this country, it's a concern that I'm seeing is quality going backwards, access to water becoming an issue, new water rights, and then also the sunveld situation, which has been going for a long time. We've been spending a lot of money to monitor the situation there, but it's all about leaching and the catchment area, and I think making sure that our not just the potato growers, but all the growers in that area are responsible, which I do believe they are, but it is quite a sensitive area, that. And then production efficiency. I think FP might share some figures on that a bit later on. Farmers are under pressure, so crop protection is obviously one of the big inputs into potato production. And then lastly, something that's probably very close to you is what's happening to Act 36. We're worried about the amount of actives that we are losing. I don't think I'm going to go into detail there, but as an industry, we are willing to help CropLife members if they want us to engage with the registrar on specific topics. So just something on diversity before I go into the tuber moths. I think it's important to note we do cultivar trials throughout the country, and I think one thing I wanted to point out is how cultivars differ in the regions. I suppose a potato is like wine as well. The terroir is so important, and this is just a comparison between a trial in the Sandveld and a trial in Tomburg, where I just took two varieties, for example, Mondial and Valor, just to show how they differ in the different regions. Where Mondial, for example, in the Sandveld had quite a low SG of 1.054 versus 1.07 in Tomburg, and the same for Valor. You could also see the difference in the SG, and obviously if you over 1.07 then or 1.075, then you qualify to process that potato. So yeah, so it's just interesting to see the difference between how potatoes perform in the region. So I think it's important to take note of that. Potato is not just a potato. So then just to go over to the work done by Hanneleen, and it's related to the potato tuber moth situation. This is actually tuta, damage by tuta, and important in the work that Dietrich Visser from the ARC did. He showed that it's actually the tuber moth that's causing the problem in the actual potato cells. The tuta didn't go down to the tuber, but the tuber moth did. And obviously one needs to remember that these two insects are different, but the symptoms are often very similar, but the result is quite different. So what I just wanted to stand still on, and just for those of you who are not aware of that, she looked at 4 groups of chemistry: the organophosphates, where she used azinphos, the pyrethroids, which she looked at lambda, and then she looked at lifenuron and indoxacarb. And what she found was, starting with azinphos, representing the organophosphates, is that there was a definite shift in sensitivity she looked at 3 areas, the Sandveld and 2 in Limpopo, 2 sites in Limpopo. And in 2 of the 3 sites, she found a sensitivity shift against the organophosphates. And the pyrethroids, she found it in all her sites that there was a sensitivity shift. So obviously meaning that the traditional pyrethroids didn't work there. In lifenurons, she found a similar picture, which is very concerning, because I think these are probably big used products. And then lastly, the one that did work was indoxacarb. She only looked at those 4 groups. She didn't look at the diamides, which is obviously quite widely used at the moment, and maybe that is some work for the future, and maybe that's something that we could work with CropLife if there's interest in that. I think that would be very interesting to see what's happening there. So I think the message here is, as the industry, we really need to look at alternative modes of action and stick to that IRAC guideline that has been developed. And then obviously the whole thing on, you guys know more than I do about application, but we see application is a big role player, and then a proactive control of the insect complex here. Then I think this is probably our topic for CropLife as well, is the use of paclobutrazole, and I think this is a question that also comes up quite a lot. Is it allowed or not? Obviously, it's not registered, so it's not allowed. And I think it's also important just to look at this chart on the growth hormones of a potato, and what is the impact of hormones on potato growth. And paclobutrazole obviously suppresses the gibberellic acid in the plant, so it's in this yellow phase here. So, and it actually concerns me that people tend to spray paclitabuterol right through the season. So I think one misses a point in many cases. So although there are companies that are looking at registrations for paclitabuterol, it's a very complicated product, and if it ever had to be registered, it would be very difficult to write that label. As I said, people are looking at it, but it's not a very easy topic. But and I think it's something that one needs to discuss if necessary. So I'm not going to spend time on that. And I think the last thing I just wanted to talk about is the future, and we see there's some interesting developments happening in gene editing. This is a slide I borrowed from Dr. Henny Groenewald, just explaining the difference between breeding, where breeding is obviously crossing a blue and a white flower, the old way of doing things, and the result is obviously a mixed population. Genetic modification, I think you're aware of, is what they do, for example, maize with Roundup Ready, where they put in a new gene, and then the genome editing is actually where you either remove a gene or you change or you edit the genetic sequence to, in the case of potatoes, there's a lot of benefits to either manage the diseases, pests, and even quality. So I think the concern that we have is that in South Africa, there's a lot of potential, but this technology is being regulated under the GM Act, which I think will suppress the speed of innovation and increase the cost of innovation. So that is something that's also of a concern to us. And it seems like it's just us in New Zealand that have decided to regulate it in this way. So I think that's a point that maybe we can talk about a bit later on. So to conclude, before I hand over to FP, I think where can we work together with the CropLife industries? I think for us, what's important, and we've learned a lot from the pepper ink spot case, which Danny will talk about just now, is how do we work closer with CropLife members on biosecurity initiatives? And that's really about sharing data. And often people see data as their intellectual property, but from Potato South Africa, we really would like to create platforms where data can be shared so people can make better decisions, because I think an insect or a pest doesn't differentiate between farms. So that's one thing. And the second part is we really depend on CropLife members to help us in providing innovation and newer modes of action and newer ways of protecting crops. So if there's any way that we could support, we are really open for that discussion. And I think the last point, and that comes to the economy of potatoes, and maybe a good introduction to FBs. I think it's about the responsible recommendations, and maybe a concern I have, and I think many of you know, I've also come from the crop protection industry. I think we should be careful of those just in case applications, because I think that's often where some of the problems come from, which first of all is expensive, but secondly has also got some repercussions that one needs to keep in mind. So I think it's about being wise and responsible in our recommendations. So that's really just my introduction. And for those of you who don't know, keep in mind that we would like to see you all at our Congress on 16, 17 July in Cape Town. So if you need more information, download your app. But I think that's what FP is also going to tell you about. Everything is on our app. So I think with that, I'm going to hand over to FP to maybe just give an introduction on the economy of potatoes, and then we could go into the technical side, if that's fine with everybody. So FP, can we give it to you then? So, FP, I think your screen was on and now it's gone again.
I think we seem to have lost FP. He might have closed the wrong screen.
Oh, yeah.
There he is again.
Okay, welcome back, FP.
All right, good day, everyone.
Okay.
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button there.
So,
That happens on a Friday. So quickly going to share my presentation. All right. Can you just give me an indication if you can see my presentation on the screen?
so we see it FP, but I don't. Yeah, I suppose we'll do it like that. Yeah.
Is it fine?
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. Like Dirk said, my name is FP Kutsia. I'm the manager for information and regions at Potato South Africa. I was tasked to give you an overview of the potato industry in terms of the economic part of it. I'm going to do my best to do that in a short time. So yeah, let's start off with the app. Currently, we're creating an app that all the information that I'm going to show you will be available in the app as we go on through the year. So please download the app. The app is very valuable. When you get to a farmer, you have a conversation with them. It's nice to know what is the market share for that region that you're working in, and what's the market share for the market, like the Johannesburg market, etc. How many potatoes was delivered to which market. It gives the farmer the idea that you know what's going on in the industry. Also, in the app, we have the prices, daily prices, stock level, stock sold, 10% class 1 medium price, and a lot of other information. And something that's very interesting, we've been working together with Syngenta, where we can draw in fields of farmers, or the farmers can do it themselves, and they can draw in a field, and it gives them the in-time weather data, maximum, minimum, and average temperatures, and a little bit more than that also. So that's very valuable. Also, we have daily, morning, and afternoon reports. This is the new reports that's going to be dropping soon in the market. So you'll be receiving that in your emails. But if you want to receive it, you need to go into your app and actually go and click the little box that says morning and afternoon reports, so you can receive these emails. There's a lot of information regarding the markets, how many deliveries on the market, stock, and prices per pocket, 10 kilogram, prices per pocket, 7 kilogram, sizes, and also there will be data regarding cultivars that's been sold on the markets. This is the quantity hectares that's currently, just want to take this away. Okay. This is the quantity hectares. The 5-year average is 52,261 hectares have been planted in the country and 16 regions. And on this map, you can see the quantity hectares planted over time. Like Limpopo is still the biggest contributor to potatoes in the country at 12,000 hectares with a market share of 22.5%. There you also get Western Free State at 15%, Eastern Free State second at 14.9%, but like you would know, there's dryland potatoes being planted there, and then Sunveld at 11.5%. Southern Cape, Eastern Cape, Northeastern Cape, they're also getting a little bit smaller in terms of hectares planted and their contribution to the total yield of potato in the country. Like Dirk said earlier, we have official number of 550 farmers that's producing potatoes in our country. When we look at input cost for irrigation, this is Limpopo's input cost. We have a figure of between 260,000 to 320,000 rand per hectare, and that's your direct input cost. And when we look at pest control, it's at 26,000. Weed control, 2,300 rand. So just a question for later on. Look at these figures. Does it make sense to you? Is it is it right? Is it far out? These figures we also get from farmers, so we only can use the information that we receive to give back to them for them to do benchmarking. So this is average figures from a few farmers in Limpopo that we use, and we test it with them, and they saying it's correct, and then we can send it out to the rest of the country and industry. So keep these figures in mind, please, for later on for the questions. The distribution of our potato crop, fresh potatoes being produced in the country is at 64%. Processing is between 16 and 24%. 4% seed, and there's export 6%, and then a little bit of seed being exported at 2%. What happened over the period of time from 1919 up until last year? I want you to focus here on 2027. If you look at the red line is the hectares being planted. The green line is the average yield at 250,000 10-kilogram bags that's being produced in the country. And each year's yields is portrayed there at the top with the green staff. So 255,000 pockets, 10-kilogram pockets being produced in the country in 2017. And the last 3 years, 260, 253, and last year, 242 million bags being produced. So last year was a record low. If we take it against the 5-year average, 8 million bags less produced in 2023 than the 5-year average. So this tells me that the potato industry is in a place where it's consolidating. So this is your hectares and the percentage variation from the average hectares planted, and we never varied uh, more than 5%, more than the 10-year average, or less than the 10-year average in terms of hectares planted. If I go back to the previous slide, from 2021, 2022, and 2023, although it's no less than 5% less than the long-term average, there is a downward trend in terms of hectares planted and also in terms of the yields. So the industry is getting a little bit smaller. There's a lot of reasons for that. It could be finances, it could be load shedding, and a lot of other reasons for that, but it's something to keep in mind. This is the hectares over time and how the crop is being divided between table, processing, and seed. And the actual figures that you see here in white at the bottom is the processing figures. That's the hectares planted for processing. So processing more or less the same in 2022 and 2023. And I believe when the final figures come out for 2024, it will also be around the average of 7,000 hectares in terms of processing. This is the raw tonnage for processing being produced in the country, around 400,000, 420,000 in total. And this is the way our crop has been marketed. So the blue line is all the potatoes that's being marketed through the municipal markets. In COVID in 2020, you will see the first time potatoes going directly around the market, or more than that, that's going through the market, the fresh produce markets, and that trend went a little bit downwards, but it's been stabilizing in 2022 and 2023. And the issue with this is the price. There's a belief that the price is being determined on the fresh produce markets. So if you send less quality, class one, and the supers around the market, but you send your class one through the fresh produce market, the supers price is being determined by a class one. Okay, so is the price being determined correctly? We don't know. The more directly we market, I think the effect on price can be negative, but that's a debate for another day. This is our channel map. This is the percentage volumes in each channel where potatoes are being marketed direct, more or less 580,000 in retail. They take more or less 334,000 tons of potatoes. Then there's crisps at 9%, frozen potatoes at 13%, and the informal market at 6%. I think Dirk earlier, we spoke this morning, he said 10% of the 60% that's going through the municipal markets are being used for quotas, and I can't remember crisps or something in the informal market. Now, this graph that I'll show you here, I call it the issue. This is our economic issue. This is our challenge as Potato South Africa in terms of our the economic and the information department. The price, the line at the top, the thick red line at the top, that is the price for loose potatoes in retail. So when you go to a retail store and you buy loose potatoes, that's the price that you're going to pay per kilogram. You see the trend there is upwards. And at the bottom, the thick red line, way at the bottom, that is the price that the farmer receives for his 10 kilogram bag, calculated per kilo, after marketing cost has been taken out. Now, the issue with that is it seems like the price in retail and the price that the farmer receives is moving away from each other. The purple line, the stipple line that you see there, that's the actual cost per pocket for a certain region to produce, the direct cost per pocket to produce a potato. And it seems like the price that the farmer is receiving is moving closer and closer to the input cost. And that's the price squeeze situation that they talk about in economics. And that's the risk for us in the potato industry. It's getting more risky and riskier to plant potatoes because of higher input cost and lower prices, and also the change in price, die volatiliteit van price, in other words. Good. Also, I'm going to take you now through what's happening currently in the market. These information are available for anyone. If you want this information, just send me a mail or a WhatsApp, or anyone that can communicate with me, and I can put you on a group, and we send this out on a weekly basis. This is a WhatsApp that we send out, a PDF that's available for the whole industry, so you can use this information as you please. So the average potato price from January was at 80 Rand on average. That's a record high price for that time of the year, and it's been going downwards. Main reason for this is stock levels are increasing slowly but surely, and quality is also an issue. And another issue that we find in the market is buying power of buyers. So people don't have enough money to buy bulk anymore, so they buy small little amounts. And also previously, a few years back, on the fresh produce market, the buyers would buy throughout the month. Now, currently, the trend is they buy actually at the end of the month when they have salaries and income. This, I think you will find interesting and important for you. The market share per region. So when is which region coming into the market currently? That the stipple line is where we are in time. Western Free State, they are going into the big part of their harvest now. Eastern Free State going towards the tail. Northern Cape starting now. I think I was in Northern Cape yesterday. There's now 4 big farms that started taking out potatoes, and a month or two from now, Limpopo will start coming in strong. Northwest finishing and Southwestern Free State almost done. This is the same graph, just with the percentage market share. And this is what's been happening with stock levels, number of bags sold, and the actual price. So at this stage, this is week 20, we are almost 4 million bags less. So 4 million bags less sold when we, as ons dit vergelyk with the 5-year average. And the actual price on average is now 60 rand 82. 2023, same period in time, the price was 57.72. So the price is still higher in comparison with last year's first 20 weeks price, but it's getting closer and closer to each other. I think 2 weeks back when I did a presentation, the price difference between 2023 and 2024 was 6 rand on average. There you can see stock levels increasing and the reaction of price on that. Also look at the spike and the spike in price going up, price going down. That's the week trend of a price. Usually Mondays, the price start a little bit low. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, price increase. Towards the weekend, price go downward again. And that happens every week in and week out. Okay, this is the top 10% versus the bottom 10% prices, class 1 medium. Now, what is interesting here, as you can see there in the description, is class 1 medium. It's all class 1 and it's all medium. But look at the price difference. The bottom 10 trading at just below 30 Rand and the top 10 trading at 70 Rand. Now that's a 40 Rand difference. Now what's happening here is we see on the fresh produce markets, more and more farmers are putting class 1 potatoes, class 2 potatoes in a class 1 bag. So there's not actually class 1 potatoes. That price at the bottom, I believe, is actually a class 2 potato. Just for interest sake. We also have data on the different prices that the different regions, on average, that the different regions receive for their potatoes. This can give you an idea of the quality that's in the region. And then the sales of 10 kilogram bags per week for each region. Now, Eastern Free State, Western Free State, Natal, and Northern Cape, and also Ceres. All these 5 regions have been selling less bags for the first 20 weeks in comparison with their 5-year, in comparison with 2023. Gauteng and Northwest, Northeastern Cape, and Sunveld has been selling more bags for the first 20 weeks compared to last year's first 20 weeks. 3 weeks back, I think it was in the middle of April, there was only one region that sold more potatoes for, I think it was week 16, more potatoes than in comparison with 2023. So this shows me that there's more and more potatoes coming into the market. I get a feeling when I look at the stats and when I talk to the different regions, the harvest is a little bit late. So we're expecting more potatoes coming in later in this year into the harvest. So that means price will, or can be rather, under pressure for the foreseen next, let's say, 4 to 6 weeks. And that is all from me. Thank you.
Thanks, FP, for that. So I think we're going to then go over to Lindy, then just to talk on the pepper ring spot virus. I think many of you probably have met Lindy over the last year, and I think it's quite interesting. There's a lot of lessons out of this virus. So yeah, so I'll hand over to you, Lindy, if that's fine with you.
Thank you, Dirk. Good afternoon, everyone. I would just like to thank CropLife, firstly, and secondly, Potato SA for this opportunity to share a little bit of the information we've generated recently on pepper ring spot virus in South Africa with you. My name is Lindy Estreisen. I am a senior researcher working in virology at the ARC situated in Roodeplaat, and I've been working now on the pepper ring spot virus since December 2022. I've been asked to just give you an overview of the literature as well as the information that we've generated in our research over the last year or so. I'm the virologist working on this project, and I'm assisted by Dr. Mariette Marais as the nematologist from the AOC. Firstly, I'm going to just give you a little bit of more background information, especially from a crop protection point of view. The vectors of a virus is very important. And in this case, the vectors are nematodes. So I'm pretty sure that most of you know that nematodes are thread-like round worms that live in a wide range of environments. And a lot of them feed on various different parts of a plant, and many of them are plant parasitic nematodes that feed on plant parts, especially in the soil, under the soil. So there's more than 41,000 different species that are plant parasitic nematodes, and a lot of them feed on the roots. Some of them are endo or ectoparasites, either living inside and feeding inside and reproduce inside the root structures. And then a number of them feed externally on the root structures, and they also reproduce within the soil matrix. Most of these plant parasitic nematodes feed by piercing and killing the root cells with a needle-like structure that is called a stylet. On the left-hand side, you can see the body structure of a Trichodurus nematode, and at the top, the stylet, the bent stylet of Trichodurus is visible. The stylet is that hollow mouth spear that looks like an hypodermic needle that it uses to pierce the plant cells when it feeds on the roots or the tubers, and then suck up the plant content. And most of them then feed by this method, and we therefore call them either lesion, lance nematodes, needle nematodes, sting, stunt, or sting nematodes. When they feed like this on the plant roots, they can either cause direct damage to the plant root system and reduce the plant's ability to absorb water and nutrients. And this then causes a reduction of your root mass or distortion of the root structure or enlargements of the roots. And generally on the above ground parts of the plant, it causes general abiotic stress symptoms that can be seen as yellowing, stunting, and wilting, and often accompanied by a yield decline on the above growing parts of the plant. Or they can also cause indirect damage due to the vectoring of viruses, which we will be talking about today. You can see in the picture here at the bottom, this is a maize root system that was fed on by stubby root nematodes, and you can see the damage to the root system due to premature dying of the roots in that plant. And on the right-hand side, on these onions, you can see just the feeding of the nematodes on the root structures, how it reduces the growth and retards the growth of these plants both above and below ground. And then I know many of you know a number of different nematode species. This is just an overview of the classification of your nematodes. And if you look at all the different known nematodes, we know that many of them feed on microbes like fungi, bacteria, or protozoa that is found within the soil structure, or they can also feed on animals, including other nematodes. And then very importantly, they also feed on plants. And if you look at the classification structure, many of them are either classified as migratory endoparasites. A very important and well-known example here are your root lesion Patralenchus species that feed on around about 400 different plant species, or your burrowing Rhodophyllus species. They all fall in the Rhabdina clade. Then you also find your sedentary endoparasites, with the very well-known root knot nematode being a very good example. This one is a very wide host range. It feeds on more than 3,000 plant species. Another example within this group is your cyst nematodes, Heterodera and Globodera. Your soybean cyst nematode is a very good example here, as well as your potato cyst nematode, Globodera palladina and Rochtiensis. Then down here, you can find the Dorolamidae group, which has ectoparasitic nematodes that do not enter the root cells. They live on the outside within the soil. A very important example here is your dagger nematodes or Ziphinema. And if you look on the right-hand side in this blue diagram, you can see this is an electron microscope picture of a Ziphinema feeding on the roots of a grapevine plant. And you can see very clearly the needle-like stylet of your Ziphinema. The Ziphinema stylet is actually quite long, allowing it not just to feed on your epidermal cells on the outside layer of the root tip, but they can also penetrate and feed from the internal cell layers inside the root. Then lastly, your Trichodoridae nematodes fall in this group of ectoparasites. They are called stubby root nematodes or Trichodurus nematodes. Within these group, there are 3 genera that are very important: your Nonidurus, your Paratrichodurus, and your Trichodurus. Your Nonidurus is well known as a very wide, also having a quite a wide host range. And then only these 2 groups, these 2 clades down here, are known to be vectors of plant viruses. Your Longiduridae nematodes, where we find that Ziphinema, Longidurus, and Paralongidurus nematodes are able to transmit about 41 different species of nepoviruses. And then Trichodurus are known to transmit 3 Tobra viruses: your tobacco rattle virus, P. early browning virus, as well as pepper ring spot virus that we will be talking about today. So it's only these 2 groups of viruses that are known to be transmitted by nematodes to plants, your nepoviruses and your Tobra viruses. When you look at the feeding mechanism of these nematodes, you can understand why they are able to transmit viruses, because they use their stylet to pierce the cells. You can see on the left-hand side here, there's the nematode, and it pierces the single cells in the root on the epidermis of your root cells, just behind the root tip. It pierces the cell and it forms a feeding tube that extends into the cytoplasm of the cell. And then it punctures using that needle-like or Hughes style. It punctures the cytoplasm quite a number of times, and thereby liquefying the content of the cell on the inside. And then through the feeding tube, it sucks up the cellular content, all the cytoplasm, including the nucleus. And it's in this feeding method that it then collects the virus, and the virus is then ingested into the body cavity. And the virus on the right-hand side and the bottom, you can see here electron microscope diagram showing a Trichodurus. And what you see actually here, this white area that is filled by viral particles, is the esophagus lining of your Trichodurus that is filled with these rod-shaped viral particles. Your Trichodurus then are able to transmit this virus when it starts feeding from another root cell, then into that root cell. And thereby, this indirect damage, it vectors the virus between plants in the soil. The virus is also retained for many months by these non-feeding nematodes. They retain and transmit the virus according to different references between 27 weeks and up to 3 years after they've acquired the virus. So they are able to transmit the virus for a very long time. The juveniles, as well as the adults, are able to transmit the virus, but the virus is not transmitted through the eggs or through molting. The nematodes themselves are able to move only less than a meter through the soil within their own lifetime, so they cannot move by themselves over long distances. Long distance movement of nematodes are possible, and they can rapidly spread from field to field, but this is normally accomplished by farm equipment or muddy shoes that are contaminated with nematode infested soil. They can also move with water during floods or irrigation, and you also get movement of nematodes via infected plants, seeds, potato tubers, as well as bulbs. So if we come now to pepper ring spot virus, we know that pepper ring spot is a Tobra virus, and Tobra viruses are transmitted by Trichodoridae nematodes, or we call them stubby root nematodes. There are 3 genera within this group that are widespread found in South Africa: Trichodurus, Nonidurus, and Paratrichodurus. And if we look at the literature, we know that it has been reported that pepper ring spot virus was transmitted by the nematode called Paratrichodurus minor. If you look at the literature, this is the nematode name that you will see, but the names for this group has been changed, and the new name in taxonomic classification is now Nonidurus minor, and this was shown in artichokes to be the vector of pepper ring spot virus. We also know that this nematode has quite a wide host range, and in South Africa, it has been reported from all kinds of agricultural cultivation areas. We know that they prefer sandy soil, and there has to be a film of water within the soil for the nematodes to be able to move. This is research that has been carried out by the ANC, and we know the distribution of the virus in South Africa is quite wide. All of these blue dots indicate from the 1960s identifications of Nonidurus minor within agricultural or other areas in South Africa. If you do a soil sample analysis, I'm sure many of you have come across data like this. This is just an example from a crop rotation study that the ARC has been carrying out in the Eastern Free State. I just want to highlight to you the numbers of nematodes that you are likely to find. For example, Melanogyne, your root knot nematode. You can see here a wide variation in the numbers of these nematodes, but very importantly, you can see that because that one single female can lay up to 300 eggs at a time, their numbers can reach quite high numbers. You can see here in the high thousands. Your Patralenchus nematodes are also known to be able to occur at quite high numbers. Whereas your Nonidurus minor numbers or Trichoduridae numbers they are only able to lay 1 egg at a time. So their numbers, even though it can go quite high, you can see this one 683, but generally their numbers are much lower in comparison to the other 2 important plant parasitic nematodes within this group. Here is also just an indication of all the different vectors that Nonidurus minor has been found to be able to feed on in South Africa. The list is quite long. There's more than 100 species roughly, and I've just highlighted a few of the hosts that are known for Tobra viruses on the slides. You can see there lucerne and maize, oats, bees, peppers, potatoes, ryegrass, sorghum, soybeans, sugar beans, sunflower, tobacco, tomato, wheat, etc., etc. So the host range for Nonidurus is quite wide. I come now to information specifically about pepper ring spot. These viruses fall in the Tobra virus genus, and there's 3 viruses within this group. The first one at the top of the tree is the largest because it has been known for the longest. We've known about tobacco rattle virus since 1899, and there's also the most information and work that has been done on this member of the genus is tobacco rattle virus. The next one is pepper ring spot virus, which is the newcomer, and then P. early browning virus that is only found to infect legumes. Pepper ring spot virus has only been found before in Brazil in the 1960s, and the next time that it popped up somewhere was in South Africa recently in 2020. Whereas tobacco rattle virus has been known for quite a number of years, you can find it widespread in various states in the United Kingdom, in Europe, Russia, in Japan, New Zealand, Egypt and Ethiopia, the Middle East, as well as in America. Why it is important in terms of potato production is the fact that it produces these ring spots or corky ring spots that you can see in this picture on potatoes, making the tubers unmarketable. It can also produce symptoms on the leaves of potatoes. And in South Africa, we now have pepper ring spot virus, which causes the same type of corky ring spot symptoms in the potato tubers, and it can also produce the symptoms on the leaves. When you look at the host range of tobacco rattle virus, it includes more than 400 plant species. Many of them are important agricultural crops. And as I've said, in tobacco, we've known about the disease that this virus caused on tobacco since 1899. We have much less information available on pepper ring spot virus. If you look at the host range indicated on the left, it was first identified in Bidens species, which is a weed in Brazil. Your blackjacks fall into that group. It is also known to infect cause ring spots in peppers, tomatoes, a number of weeds like Chenopodium amaranticolor can also infect peas and as well as beans. Beans. And the most important factor when you look at the distribution of these viruses is knowing what vector they have. And your tobacco rattle virus is known to be transmitted by various different species within your Paratrichodurus and Trichodurus nematode group. And we have that one report of Nonidurus minor being able to transmit pepper ring spot virus on artichokes. So if we quickly go and look at the information that is known about pepper ring spot virus in South Africa, since 2019, it was the first time that in the potato certification system, they became aware of symptoms of corky ring spot on the inside of tubers in a commercial planting in the Northern Cape. Thereafter, in 2020, on 2 occasions, once in the Eastern Free State and then again in the Western Free State, the certification system became aware of tubers with tuber inspections that showed similar symptoms. It was then in 2020 that Professor Gerard Peterson was asked to take a look at these potato tubers, and he used a technique called next generation sequencing to identify pepper ring spot virus within those potatoes. Then the certification system carried on to monitor for symptom expression within the system. 2020-21, no symptoms were observed, and then again in 2022, there's a number of cases that were identified, and then in 2023, with the beginning of the research by the Agricultural Research Council that I was also involved in, we identified a number of infections throughout South Africa and many of the production areas. It was also the first time we were able to do some research in a potato field where we knew that the potatoes were infected while the potatoes were still growing, and we became aware of the symptoms that were expressed on the potato leaves, as you can see there at the top. And we then asked the question, in all of these years before, pepper ring split was identified, especially in seed potato production. So we were concerned with commercial potato production, and we then started to survey commercial potatoes at the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market in June 2023 up until now. And then early part of this year, we identified another case at a commercial producer in the Eastern Free State that had quite severely infected potatoes. In this slide, before I provide you information about our survey, I just wanted to remind everyone that are maybe not so familiar with the potato seed production system, that in South Africa, we are not allowed to import any potato tubers. All potato tubers that are used as seed originate from tissue culture production facilities within South Africa. So we have a number of seed, we call them seed houses in South Africa, like Westgrowth, GWK, FPD, FPD, RSA, etc. They all have special propagation facilities where they bring import tissue culture material from, for example, Scotland and the Netherlands. These are then established within these tissue culture facilities and propagated into little plantlets. And from those plantlets are then transplanted out into insect-proof greenhouses, where these plants are then used to produce what we call a mini tuber. Mini tubers are then seen as generation 0. They are then sold to low generation propagation facilities or farms, where they are planted as a G0. And it's for at this generation, when the G1s are produced, that they are planted for the first time in soil on a farm, and therefore exposed to the environment and able to get infected by various different pathogens. Generation 1 and 2 is normally done by seed potato producers that are specifically involved in low generation production. We would call them seed potato producing farmers. And when they harvest the seed potatoes, sometimes, a lot of the time, a lot of the potatoes from those fields are also then sent to the fresh produce market. Your generation 3 and above are what is normally sold to a table potato producer and then used as starting material for the production of table potato producers that will be then sent to the market. And it would be those producers that we would survey on the fresh produce market. As FPA has indicated to you, various different areas are in production at different times over the year. And as we then survey on the market over a year, we will then see the representation of the areas that are infected with pepper ring spot as we survey across the year. We have started in June last year to survey, and we're almost at June to be able to have data for a full year. You can see here in the table on the right, we have been collecting potatoes on the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market for a number of times, as well as 2 times at market day number 5 and 10 on the Cape Town market. And in total, we have collected 934 samples representing 934 potato bags on the market. Of them, we have tested 655 of those bags. We are at about 70% of those samples being tested, and we have found 132 of those samples positive, which gives us an infection percentage of 20%. And very importantly, I would like to point out that only 3.1% of those potatoes were symptomatic that were collected on the market. So out of the 20% that were infected, a large number of those potatoes were infected without expressing any symptoms. Only 3.1% were infected with symptoms. So if we summarize that on a map, these are the different areas where we found potatoes on the market that originated with infection. In the table on the right at the top, you can see that we've already found infected tubers in 7 of the provinces in South Africa, including many different areas in the Free State, Limpopo, Northwest, KwaZulu-Natal, the Northern Cape, and Mpumalanga, as well as in Gauteng, and the areas from which those potatoes were originating or indicated, and it was also found from both commercial producers as well as seed potato producers that delivered on the market. The cultivars that have thus far been found to be infected include Mondial, Panamera, Cifra, Up-to-Date, Allison, Avalanche, and La Norma. And recently, we've also found one of the processing potato cultivars to be infected. This slide just indicates to you the typical symptoms that are normally present in the infected potatoes. We call them brown flecks, spots, walls, or curved lines of corky tissue. And this is the reaction of the plant to infection, trying to limit the spread of the virus in the potato tuber. Most of the time, you only have slight symptoms on the potatoes, and sometimes you also do find potatoes that are quite severely infected with a lot of brown marks on the inside. The potatoes here in the middle on the top were so severely infected you could actually see the corky ring spots from the outside of the potato. And you can also see here after frying that the symptoms really impact the quality of the potato tuber products and causes downgrading of the class to class 3. As I've said, we've also recently found a processing potato to be infected, which was Marquise. And on the right-hand side here, you can see the symptoms that was expressed within that potato, which would then make them unmarketable as a processing potato. You sometimes also find symptoms of this virus on the leaves. The photos here is cases where we were made aware of the plants that were infected while it was still growing, so we could take some photos. The first fields we were able to visit were Mondials, so you can see the photos, the symptoms being expressed on the Mondial leaves. And on the right-hand side here, you can see a Panamera cultivar that was also infected, but the symptoms don't look quite the same as what you would see on Mondial. On the Mondials, I always described it as it looks like someone has messed bleach on the leaves. You have this random mosaic patterns on the leaves. The Panameras looked slightly differently, but we tested them and they were infected. And I would just also like to point out that sometimes you see symptoms like this photo in the middle at the bottom. This was a case where we were not sure. The symptoms didn't look quite like what we are getting used to for pepper ring spot. And when we tested it, the plants were negative for pepper ring spot, but was positive for alfalfa mosaic virus or calico. So it is sometimes possible that you can, it's difficult to differentiate between the symptoms of the different viruses on the leaves. The next few slides, I would just highlight some lessons that we've learned with some of the fields that we were able to gather some data on. This field was in Limpopo in the Vivo area in November last year in 2023. It was the first field with growing potatoes that were infected with pepper ring spot that we managed to visit and gather some data. You can see the symptoms. These plants were quite old. They were already in week 16 at that stage, and they had a number of other problems with them as well. But quite a large number of the plants in that field was infected. We also know that the seeds that was planted in that field were infected before they were planted in that field. They did not get infected within that field. And I also like to point out it was the first time that we could lift one of these infected plants and then evaluate the transmission of virus from the mother tuber that was in this case infected when it was planted to the daughter tubers, which we would call secondary transmission. And we collected the potatoes from a number of these plants, and you can see here at the bottom is a representation of some of the tubers from one specific plant. On the left-hand side, you can see that some of the tubers expressed slight symptoms of pepper ring spot. On the right-hand side, you can see some of the tubers had no symptoms at all. But in both cases, we were able to detect the virus in the non-symptomatic as well as in the symptomatic tubers. growing on that specific plant. And it is very important that you notice that you do get mother-to-daughter transmission of the virus. And if those tubers are then planted again in the next season, they will transmit the pepper ring spot virus to the growing plants. This is another field where seed potatoes were planted. They found this field to be infected just before Christmas in 2023 due to the expression of symptoms on the leaves. So with field inspection, potato certification became aware of infection in this land, and you can see here the symptoms that was expressed on the leaves in that field. Very importantly, because the previous year, just before Christmas, the regulation that was in place at that time was that all fields that were found to be infected with pepper ring spot was placed under quarantine by the department, so that these potatoes would not be planted again and therefore spread the virus within the country. But just before Christmas, the department, due to the large number of infections, lifted the regulation. So it meant that if potatoes were produced for table potato production, it did not have to be placed under quarantine. So this farmer then had the option, because he knew while the plants were still growing, he had the option, even though it was originally planted as seed potatoes, he could put down more nitrogen and let the plants grow out in order to produce table potatoes, and then send that to the market in order to limit his loss on this field. Because he did that, we were able to go back in February at the end of the season of these potatoes, and then generate some more results. You will remember that the leaves in this field showed quite prominent pepper ring spot leaf infection, and they also tested positive for the presence of the virus. We were therefore interested in order to see what would be the yield impact of pepper ring spot virus in this field. So we lifted 60 potato plants in that field, including a number of plants that we marked early on in the season before the plants went down, that were positive with pepper ring spot. You could still see the symptoms on those plants, as well as a number of plants right just next to them. So randomly throughout the plant, we lifted 60 plants, and we collected all the tubers associated with those plants, which were roughly about 600 tubers. And very interestingly, we cut open in the field all of those 600 tubers, and not one of them expressed symptoms. Not one of them. This really left us scratching our head, because currently we are still very unsure of what is the factors that leads to symptom expression with pepper ring spot virus. In some cases, you don't get any symptom expression on the tubers. Some cases, as in one of the slides I'll be moving on to now, you don't get any expression of symptoms on the leaves. And sometimes they don't produce any symptoms at all on the tubers or the leaves. So we really don't know what is the factors that are associated with symptom production as yet. In one of these fields of a farmer that had infected potatoes in the previous year, in 2023, we were able to go and visit that field now in April of this year. Maize was been growing in that field for the last year, and they were just before they were going to harvest. So walking through that maize field, you could see that volunteer potatoes were still coming up within that field, and a lot of these volunteer potatoes were showing symptoms on the leaves. So we dug them up and we looked at the potato tubers, and we also tested the leaves and the tubers for virus. And the leaves tested positive, the tubers tested positive for virus. So this is a very important factor for farmers to be able to control the virus within a field. Volunteer potatoes are keeping the virus within that field. And interestingly, in that specific field, because these maize plants have been growing in that field where potatoes were infected in the previous year, and within this season, there were also volunteer potatoes still growing with virus. We asked the question, Would the maize plants growing in that field also become infected with pepper ring spot virus? As we still don't know what is the host range of pepper ring spot. So we dug up some of these maize plants, took them back to the lab, washed off all the roots, all the soil from the root systems, chopped up the roots, and although these potato plants growing right next to the maize tested positive for pepper ring spot, none of the roots that we tested thus far tested positive, which might be an indication that maize might not be a host for pepper ring spot virus. We need to do a little bit more work and controlled studies in order to confirm this, but within this specific field, they did test negative. This is that field in January that we became aware of that was infected. We were made aware when the potatoes were moving through the market, and they were quite symptomatic. You could see here that on the display in the Pretoria market, these potatoes were quite definitely severely infected, and it caused downgrading of that whole field to class 3 potatoes. And because of this, we received word from the market that these potatoes were infected with pepper ring spot. We could then immediately go and visit that field. Unfortunately, the potatoes have already died down, so we couldn't see the plants growing. But the farmer mentioned to us that there was no leaf symptoms visible within that field. It was a 20-hectare pivot, and he also mentioned that the whole pivot, the potatoes were looking like that. We were then also able to visit that field in April, where the farmer have planted since February when the potatoes were lifted. He was planting a number of cover crops, including fodder peas, sun hemp, and feed sorghum. We were able to collect a number of volunteer potatoes growing in that field. Luckily, the cattle didn't eat the potatoes, although they did eat all the other cover crops. The volunteer potatoes did not show any symptoms on the leaves. We collected about 45 volunteer potatoes from that field. None of them had symptoms on the leaves. The leaves tested positive for virus, as well as the tubers. You can see here that the volunteer potato tubers that were growing in that field were quite symptomatic. Interestingly, we also tested about 45 sorghum plants growing in that field, sun hemp and fodder peas. We tested their root systems in order to see if they perhaps became infected with pepper ring spot as alternative hosts, but none of them, even though the volunteer potatoes were still infected with pepper ring spot, none of the cover crops tested positive for pepper ring spot thus far. Last year in August, we became aware that a colleague of mine called David Reed, working at the University of Pretoria, in a survey in 2021 and 2022, found pepper ring spot in sunflowers in the northwest, in Sannieshof, as well as in the Free State, in Senekal and Henneman. We were very surprised to find pepper ring spot in sunflowers as well, after doing all the research on potatoes. You can also see here the ring spots symptom produced on the leaves in the sunflower plants. And in January, middle of January, I had some information from a farmer who showed photos like this on the right-hand side to me, which was a sunflower field that was about a month old, growing in Lady Brunt. We then quickly visited that field, and these plants also tested positive for pepper ring spot virus. So we know that pepper ring spot virus causes these symptoms on sunflower leaves, and also are able to infect sunflower plants. We then monitored that field for a few months. You can see that the sunflowers continues to grow. The virus does not seem to retard the growth of the plants. The symptom expression is seen from the bottom upwards, from the bottom leaves. It becomes worse and worse. And it seems like the plant is growing much faster than the virus can translocate upwards, with the leaves expressing symptoms growing upwards in the plant. There's specific ring spot symptoms. But on the last time I've spoken to the farmer, he indicated to us there was no impact on the growth and the yield of the sunflower plants from pepper ring spot virus. We are definitely also liaising with the industry to keep an eye out for sunflowers expressing similar symptoms, so that we can also do some further research to determine how the virus is being spread from potatoes possibly to sunflowers, or from sunflowers to potatoes, or via sunflower seeds. This slide, I just want to indicate it to you that for tobacco rattle virus, because this virus has been known for so long, there's a lot of information available, and we know that it has a very wide host range that includes a number of crops, some of them very important like barley, beets, brassicas, corn, cucumber, beans, oats, onions, peas, peppers, potatoes, rice, spinach, sunflowers, and wheat. But we don't have similar breadth of information for pepper ring spot virus. These are the hosts that we currently know. And if you look at the crops, we know beans, peas, peppers, potatoes, artichokes, tobacco, and sunflower are able to get infected by pepper ring spot. But its full extent of its host range, especially the cover crops that are planted in rotation with potatoes, are at this point unknown. And we are definitely doing research in order to determine the other hosts that might be responsible for transmitting the virus in the field. We are currently doing a pot trial at the ARC with 26 different species of plants that are planted in various areas in South Africa in rotation with potatoes, in order to see if any of them are also hosts of pepper ring spot virus and therefore might be responsible for transmission of the virus in the field. So my last slide is just a summary slide of tips for management strategies for any farmer, especially a potato farmer. I would advise them to try and use virus-free planting material, because with tobacco rattle virus and now with pepper ring spot virus, we know that the virus survives infected seed tubers, and this is a big method of spreading these viruses from one season to the next, as well as over long distances. We know how seed potatoes are being transported in South Africa. So if you can, please use virus-free seed. You are welcome to send planting material to our lab for testing. There's 4 labs currently being able to test for pepper ring spot in South Africa. And also spread out your risk. Plant different cultivars and cultivars from different seed sources. When you want to look at control of the virus, it's very important to know that it is mechanically transmissible. So therefore, pruning tools or knives should be decontaminated, as well as take note of the movement of tractors from one field to the next to decontaminate them, and also not to move soil, nematode infected soil from one field to the next. Very important, the nematode is a vector, and I do not advocate for going out in order to aggressively try and control your nematode populations. Firstly, you have to know what is in your soil. So please advocate for the farmers to do a soil analysis test in order to know which nematodes are present in their soil. It's also important to know that nematodes are not suddenly going to start transmitting pepper ring spot. They have to have been exposed to a host of pepper ring spot in order to become infected, and thereafter they will be able to transmit the virus. So perform a soil test, determine the presence and the number of stubby root nematodes in the soil. Please know that they normally have a patchy distribution within the soil, and your nonivorous species can be distributed quite deep within the soil horizon, much deeper than your soil fumigation is normally applied in, and much deeper than that the ploughing is normally done in. It is known from literature that it's almost impossible to treat or prevent nematodes in the soil with chemical control. Your vector control by fumigation is not successful due to the very deep distribution and high vertical mobility of these nematodes. They migrate to the deeper soil profile and then will reinfest the treated zone after the fumigants have dissipated. Be also aware that the virus has a very wide host range. So seeds of other plants like sunflower can be spreading the virus into your field as well as weeds, and they would be a source from which the nematodes will be able to acquire the virus. Crop rotation with crops that are non-host to the virus might be an important control method. Although your nematodes are able to feed on a very large variety of plants, which makes crop rotation a very difficult method to lower your vector pressure. And then lastly, for tobacco rattle virus, in the rest of the world, like Europe and America, they have access to tobacco rattle virus resistant potato cultivars. So in areas where they struggle with tobacco rattle virus, those farmers plant tobacco rattle virus insensitive potato cultivars who do not express corky ring spot symptoms in the tubers. We do not have information on cultivar sensitivity for pepper ring spot as yet. We hope to be able to do such research in the near future. This slide, I just want to indicate to you the distribution profile of Trichodorus and Paratrichodorus species that is reported in literature. So some of the species you can see are present quite shallow, from 0 to 50, and then some of your species like Trichodorus species are known to occur quite a lot deeper within the soil profile. So this makes chemical control of these nematode species highly problematic. And I thank you for your patience and your attention. And I really appreciate sharing this information with you. And I would appreciate if the industry would be on the lookout for pepper ring spot and report any occurrences back to the ARC for further investigation. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindy. I think it's important, and I think this is also an opportunity where we could work with the industry to, if there's problems, and I know you're always looking for occurrences. So yeah, I think it's good to have that collaboration. So thanks for that. Yeah, so I think we're now going to go over to Professor Martin Steyn from Pretoria University. I think many of you do know Martin. He's agronomist that's been working on potatoes for his whole life now, Martin. So I think I'm going to hand over to you, and then you can entertain us about your work on the potatoes. Thanks, Martin.
Good afternoon. Can you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see it, yes. Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Good afternoon. Sorry to do this to you on a Friday afternoon. I hope it will be interesting to you.
It's not your fault, it's Elriza's fault.
All right. So let's first talk just about what is sustainability. Now, if you Google sustainability, you'll find many definitions for that. For instance, I found this definition on the United Nations website where it says meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations. So that's basically what we're doing now. We must try not to compromise what people will be able to do in future. I'm sure all of you are aware of the UN 17 Sustainability Development Goals, addressing all different facets of life, things like zero hunger, no poverty, and so on. And the aim is to achieve these by the year 2030, which is not so far off. But if we bring it closer to home and talk about agriculture, there's one very specific one that applies to us, especially in terms of production, and that is responsible consumption and production. And I think that's where we come in as scientists and people that are educated to help our farmers to produce more sustainably. We often talk, when we talk about sustainability, we talk about the 3P principle, which include people, profit, planet. If we talk about people, that include things like, from a producer perspective, maybe your consumers, so that you produce food that satisfy their needs, that are safe, that are nutritious, and so on. The profit side, of course, also if we talk about people, you also talk about not only the consumers, but also your workforce, your human capital, people working for you. Are those people happy? Are they satisfied with their jobs and so on? Then the profit side, I mean, no farmer will produce if he doesn't make money. So that's what the profit side is. You can propose the best practices possible, but if that means it's going not to be affordable to the farmer, then he will simply not be able to implement those. And then lastly, the aspect that I want to focus a bit more in this talk on is talking about the planet and what is included in the planet aspects of sustainability. Firstly, there we talk about preservation of natural resources for future use. Which comes in there is, for instance, biodiversity. So we don't want to clear every single square meter of land to produce crops. We have to preserve biodiversity in the different parts of our country, especially in ecologically sensitive areas. That's a very important aspect. And then from a farming side, and what we can also help farmers a lot with, I believe, is by reducing pollution. So make sure that we don't over-apply chemicals, fertilizers, and so on, so that we pollute our groundwater resources and make it less suitable for future generations to use. So in essence, it comes down to we are not able to expand and keep expanding. Land is limited, and therefore we have to produce vertically. We have to produce more crop with less input. In other words, producing more efficiently. Which brings me to the topic of today's talk and the focus more on potatoes. And to ask the question, but how efficiently are we actually growing our crops? How efficient are we in using the input resources? And that includes many things, amongst others, land, soil, water, nutrients, chemicals, and many others like labor, seed, and so on. But for the purpose of this afternoon's talk, I'm just going to focus on some of these. And you guys are all involved in the chemical industry. I'm not going to focus on that. It's not my specialty, but I believe the principles that we talk about today will also apply to those. So if we just talk about water and we look at this map of water stress areas in the world, so this is a forecast for 2040. And you can see southern part of Africa falls in the high risk or high water stress, and how they express that is the ratio of water withdrawal or water used relative to what is available. And so apart from a few other areas around the Middle East and North Africa, we fall into that region that's actually already, I believe, on our way to very highly stressed. If we just look closer to home, what is the water used by different sectors? And this is not a completely, this is a quite old figure, but it illustrates the point quite well. I think we can safely say that more than half of the fresh water that's used in this country is used for irrigation and of agricultural crops. So it puts a big responsibility on us to manage that resource more efficiently. Looking closer to the potato is a highly productive crop. It's one of the crops that produce most unit output per unit of inputs. But that said, the crop requires very high levels of inputs, things like water, nutrients, crop protection, chemicals, etc. And a couple of reasons for that is the crop, for instance, has very high fertilizer requirements because of its shallow and poorly developed root system. So it's not effective in taking up nutrients from the soil. Similarly, it is almost impossible to productive or to economically produce potatoes without irrigation nowadays. So the reason for that, it's a temperate crop that was originated from cool area, lots of rainfall, so it is quite sensitive to water stress. So the crop is highly dependent on water supply. But all that said, potato is still highly productive, and it's one of the most water efficient food crops. So if we just compare it with a couple of other crops and food products, maybe you've seen these numbers that I've shown before, and if you're interested, you can go and look at that water footprint network website, where they give all these sorts of numbers. For instance, to produce one medium-sized potato, you need, according to world average figures, about 44 liters of water. But if you just compare that to other crops like oranges, it's almost double. If you go to peaches, 3 times that amount. And if you go to animal products, of course, the numbers just run away. If you look for one egg, you need almost 200 liters of water to produce one egg. If you go to meat products, I don't show it here, but for your 300-gram steak that you're going to enjoy this evening, it will cost you about 4,500 liters of water. So those numbers are just astonishing. And so if you compare potato, it's one of the most productive crops in terms of water use efficiency. By the way, if we just look at our figures in South Africa, the average number for irrigated potato, we use 19 liters of water to produce one medium-sized potato. And I'll show you where I get those numbers from later on. But so it just shows even more efficient than many other crops. Okay, but that said, the question is, how efficient are we? And just some of the previous work that we did in the last decade, we did a quite intensive survey where we looked at resource use efficiencies in the potato industry, and those results were published already back in 2016, where we looked at the different production regions of the country, and we interviewed about 100 farmers at that time, which constitute about 15% of the active growers. Sorry, now I made a big jump. Sorry, let me just, don't know what happened there now. All right, can I just check? Can you see this slide now?
Yeah, we see the one that says remote sensing, Martin, if that's the one you wanted to share. Yeah.
Sorry, let me just.
I think it might be stuck. Or something, yeah.
Sorry, I think I apologize for that. It doesn't show in presenter mode now. Does it show in presenter mode?
Yeah, we're seeing we're seeing your screen. It says how efficient is potato production, and now we're gone again.
Right, is it there now?
I think something. Oh, there you are. How efficient is potato production in South Africa? There you are.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So we looked at all sorts of inputs and also the practices followed, including water, nutrients, labor, seed, chemicals, energy, transport, and so on. But what I'm going to focus on is water and nutrients now. And we needed all these inputs to also calculate the carbon footprints of different farms and farming systems. All right, so just to jump directly into the results, what we saw there, we looked at that time 16 different production regions, and you can see the water use efficiency, kilograms of potatoes per millimeter of water applied. And what strikes immediately is the big range that you see for different regions. So the average was 80 kilograms per hectare per millimeter, which then relates to that 19 liters for one potato to produce, based on this average number. But if you just look at how regions varied, quite a number of regions did not meet that number. So there are different explanations. Of course, one could argue that some regions are just more efficient than others, but I think the climate, soils, all of those factors obviously play a role, and we don't really have insight into that if you just work from a survey. What is actually more disturbing is if you look at within a certain production region, one could see for, in this case, 9 different growers, how the numbers varied, once again, for water use efficiency. So the average number is quite acceptable. It's above 100. But individual farmers, not all of them reach that number. So what's the reason for that? So what we did in the end is we could put all different types of efficiencies on radar graphs like this, or diagrams like this. So potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, land or yield, energy, and so on, water use efficiency, seed use efficiency. And these values are relative values expressed to relative to the best performing region in each of those different efficiencies. So in other words, in this case, Western Free State was, it achieved 95% of the best region in terms of yield, and so on. And there's just another example of Highveld at that time. And you can see in 3 of these efficiencies, Highveld produced best: water use, energy, and land use efficiency. And what we typically saw is that, especially regions with sandy soils, nutrient and water use efficiencies were often slightly lower than in other regions. But this is, of course, just from a survey. So that, and this prompted us to go and try and figure out a bit at regional level within a region what can be the explanation for these results. So another project followed, which we called Unpacking Ecological Sustainability of Potato Production. And we started in Northwest, and that was then followed by a study in the Sunveld in the Western Free State. So that's in the last 5 years or so, we did this study where we did detailed measurements in fields of water and nutrient inputs. So in total, we investigated 25 fields over time, where we did very detailed measurements. We installed equipment in the fields, and we measured things like irrigation amounts, drainage, soil water contents, and we got the information of nutrients applied from the farmers. And then in the end, the idea was to do water and nutrient balances. We look at the final yields, and then we calculated the efficiencies, amongst others. We measured many other things that I'm not showing here because of time. Just quickly, just jumping through a few photographs of the things that we measured. We measured water amounts by flow meters, soil water content, all different types of sensors. And then very importantly, something that's not often measured is we don't often know what the losses due to drainage is. So this is picture, of course, that comes from the manual. It's not, we don't grow potatoes in those type of soils in this country usually. But it's basically, it's a sensor that's installed in the field. It collects water that pass a certain level of the root zone, and it collects at the bottom of this instrument, and there's a logger, a sensor that logs, and we have the ability to extract the water. So here's just the lysimeter upside down on its head, already filled with an undisturbed soil sample. This is the floor at which it's installed, the depth, and then what then protrudes above the soil is this extension pipe with a sensor, and just different installations here. So quite a big mission to install these, and typically this is what it looks like. So we're interested in the water that drains beyond 1 meter depth, and the assumption is that water that has passed that layer is not available to plants anymore. If all goes well, this is what it looks like afterwards. So all you can see above ground is this pipe with a sensor that goes to a logger, and then a small pipe that we can use to extract the water, firstly to determine the volume of drainage, but also to analyze it to see how much nutrients will be in that water. So it's not, of course, water that drains away, but nutrients that also leach away. Then other things that we measured, for instance, system evaluations for uniformity and efficiency, where we put out rain gauges, and this is just an example of results. I mean, one would be surprised. Often you will find a brand new pivot, and if you do a evaluation, that pivot is not performing according to expectations. So this was not a new pivot, but this is just an example. If you look at the length of the pivot and the millimeters collected in different rain gauges, spaced 5 meters apart along the length of the pivot, and we can see in some places the irrigation amount was about half than what you collected in other places. So definitely this is not acceptable. It's acceptable. These uniformities are low relative to the norms, and it's actually something very simple that one can fix if you just make an assessment every now and then, every year or 2 years of your pivots. All right, this is one example of yields that were achieved from actual measurements in the Western Free State. This case. And we can see average yield was very good of these 7 fields of 90 tons. But with the exception of this field number 7, all of these fields were planted like sort of the same planting window of about 2 weeks. So what is the reason for the yield differences that we see here? Yields are still good, but why did some guys get more than 100 ton, 110 tons, and the next guy 70 tons? If we now express this relative to the yield potential that we calculate with a model, we can see on average 90% of the potential was achieved, which is excellent. But if you look at other farmers, 2 of these farms did not perform so well. So what is the reason for that? And we try to tease those things out from all the measurements that we made. For instance, if we look at the water balance, the water inputs and losses, it was quite a wet year. This was in like 2 years ago, quite a wet year, but still some irrigation was needed. And you can see the range on average 260, but they ranging between 179 and 439. Was that really necessary? So if we look at the total water inputs on average 600 millimeters, this is the evapotranspiration calculated with a model. And we can see because of most likely over-irrigation and to some extent also a lot of rain, we saw quite a bit of drainage that was collected in the lysimeter. If we now look at the water balance in graphical format, this is now jumping to the Sandveld, just 1 or 2 examples I'm showing you. And just quickly explain the legends. The black zigzag line here is evapotranspiration calculated with a model, so how much water the crop needed actually on a specific day. And you can see this was planted in summer, so very hot initially, so high demand. Then the blue is rainfall, not much rainfall in the summer, maybe only one event of meaningful event. And then daily irrigation, the red bars. And we can see almost irrigated on a daily basis. And you can clearly see on many occasions the irrigation amount exceeded the crop water use. So what you can expect is that water must go somewhere. So there was a lot of drainage. So this dotted line gives you the cumulative logger drainage. And in this case, 240 millimeters of water was collected in the lysimeter. So this is an exceptional case, but it's one example of how things can go wrong if we don't monitor and we don't manage our water properly. Opposed to that, there is another example with irrigation, a few bigger events initially. This was planted on quite a dry profile. The subsoil was dry. Planted earlier in July, so cooler initially, the water use lower. But you can see rarely that in the season that the irrigation amounts exceed the demand. And for that reason, even with these 2 big rainfall events, there was only 4 millimeters of drainage collected. So an example of a very well managed field. If we look at the water use efficiency, once again, we saw this trend in all the regions that we measured, quite big differences in efficiency, where some of these farmers clearly did not meet that average figure for the country of 80, while others performed exceptionally well. So what is the reason for that? Okay, let's change gears and jump to nutrients. And I'm showing only nitrogen as an example because that's nitrogen is the one that we know that losses are quite easily recorded if you over-irrigate. Nitrogen application on average 320, quite high, but I mean for those very high yields, that's to be expected. Interesting, what is what we call the nutrient export. So what's taken up by the tubers, the leaves, and the stems. And we see of what is applied, only about 130 kilos is taken up by the tubers, and some in the leaves and some in the stems, which of course also remain in the field. So after decomposition, in a season or so, that will also become available again. And then leaching with the irrigation water that was collected, and we can see quite a bit of nitrogen leached. In this instance, number 3, for instance, mostly because of rain, a lot of rain. In the case of number 1, because of over-irrigation. So quite high losses that are occurring. So then what remains in the field, so that's the theoretical calculation of C, which is the inputs, what is applied minus the losses, or which is or the exports, and on average, about 100 kilos of N remains in the field. Now, that's not to say that we can deduct 100 kilos from here to achieve the same yields, because we know uptake efficiency is not 100%. I'll come to that just now. But it's just to say we must keep in mind there's quite a bit of nitrogen, probably after potatoes. I think in most cases, farmers make provision for that with the following crop. But we must also keep in mind for some regions where follow-up crop is not always planted, like in the Sunveld, for instance. If you have so much nitrogen left, you don't have a crop, and then there's a good chance that that will be leached as soon as you start getting the first rains thereafter. Right, this is just a bit of a busy graph, but just showing you over time, over the growing season, firstly the leaching, cumulative leaching over the growing season for this specific field, 100 millimeters about, and then the cumulative, the bars, firstly the nutrients leached at each event, which is about every 3 weeks as we visited the site, and then the cumulative leaching. And you can see the nutrient that leached in most cases, mostly is calcium, and often also sulfur, but in this specific case followed by nitrogen and then magnesium and so on. Interestingly, in most cases we did not get so much leaching of potassium, in fact, in spite of the fact that potassium is quite mobile in the soil. But that gives you an idea of quite substantial amounts of and what we also found, which is quite interesting about the calcium, of course, it can come from the irrigation water, but it can also come from gypsum. We often apply high amounts of gypsum. We know gypsum is not very soluble, but still we collected quite high amounts of calcium and sulfur where gypsum was applied. So it gives you an indication it does move quite a bit in the soil. All right, let's talk about nitrogen uptake efficiency. That's also always a sort of a interesting figure. So of what is applied, and we express as kilogram nutrient removed by the plant and the tubers compared to what was applied as fertilizer or with the irrigation water. And it will be interesting to know what people think in their minds, what the efficiency is of different nutrients. This is now firstly the example for Western Free State, and I've put here at the bottom the averages for the other 2 regions that we did earlier. And one can see on average about 63% of what is applied gets taken up by the plant. And that's why we get those amounts remaining in the soil. So the plant is not 100% efficient, even if there is enough. Even if you apply more, it will take up to some point, but there will always be. And if you reduce it, most likely you will not get the yields that you expect because of the fact that uptake efficiency is not 100%. If you look at global figures, often potatoes is quoted about around 50%, so this is not bad. This one instance of 130% is, I think, is exceptional. The range is usually around for our The average, I would say, is around 60 to 70%. But you can see big differences between fields also. Phosphorus around the average of 37%. If you look at, once again, world figures, often reported about 20%, 25%, so this is not bad. But only 37% of what is applied is taken up. The interesting one is potassium. So if there is more potassium in the soil, the plant will take it up. So on average here, we got 142%. So much more than what was applied was taken up by the plant. And the range that we got over this whole study period was 60 to 160%. Also, and then the others, I'm just skimming over them to save time. So what are the most important observations from this specific study? We found quite a range in water use efficiencies between the fields, and it could be ascribed to rainfall and irrigation differences. So quite often you get a lot of rainfall unexpected, and it will, of course, drain away and not be used efficiently. So quite often lower efficiencies were due to low yields. So it's important not to say that you over-irrigated necessarily, but if you achieve very low yields, of course, that's going to affect your efficiency because of other reasons, not necessarily irrigation, high rainfall and so on. Drainage recorded mostly after rainfall events. So I must say that in most cases, not because of over-irrigation, but definitely some cases, a few cases where we did observe that. And of course, if you get drainage, the chance is very good that you will leach nutrients, mostly calcium, sulfur, and potassium, and then, calcium, sulfur, and nitrogen, and followed by potassium. And even in a few instances, small amounts of phosphorus, which we normally believe does not leach in soil. If you go to places like the Sandveld, very sandy soils. So like with water use efficiency, we got quite a range of nutrient use efficiencies between fields. Very importantly, substantial amounts of nutrients remain in the soil. So one must take it into account in the irrigation, in the planning of your follow-up crops. We've seen examples where farmers reduce their fertilizer rates of follow-up crops substantially, but in other cases they just apply the normal amount they would have applied if it was not potatoes before, and that's definitely one place where you can save and improve your efficiency and reduce losses. So I think in many cases, the biggest factor that affect these efficiencies is management. So management practices must be improved to limit unproductive losses and so improve efficiency. But how do we do that? What strategies can we apply to improve resource use efficiency? Well, I think it's important to first go and identify non-sustainable practices and things that could be improved. And explore options to improve those. So if we look at this diagram, let's imagine, for instance, for water use efficiency, we got a range of values, we can call them indicator values, between different farms. And I think we're in the process of sort of setting norms of looking in my region. If I have a water use efficiency of 60, I haven't met the critical value of, let's say, 80. So there's something unsustainable in the practice that I'm doing. So I must try to improve to get to some target value of 80 or 100 or kilos per hectare per millimeter or whatever, to move into the sustainable range. But as long as you don't target those practices, must I go and look at the efficiency of my irrigation system? Must I use tools to help me make decision when to irrigate and so on? And the idea is hopefully that over time you will move from the non-sustainable to a sort of a transitional zone and reach a sustainable range. But we must keep in mind that it's not always, there's always an interaction of many factors. It is always not one specific limiting factor. So if you all know this picture of the barrel illustrating von Liebig's law of the minimum. So the most limiting factor will limit your yield. In this instance, for instance, if nitrogen was limiting, but it could be not water that's limiting or light, it's time of year. So if I grow potatoes in winter in the Sandveld or in Limpopo, I will not be able to achieve yields of 100 tons per hectare because there's not enough light that time of year. So it doesn't matter if I apply more nitrogen, better pest control, better disease control, whatever. I'm not going to reach that because that's not my most limiting factor. We can also illustrate it with this graph. So you will be able to improve in production if you improve practices. It's up to a certain point when that factor is not limiting anymore. And there's another factor that limits yield. So if you can manage to identify and improve that, you will push up your production and so on and so on until you've sort of optimized your whole system. And how do we do that? I think in many instances, there are decision support systems or tools that we can use to optimize. And that's our task as educated people who are educated in agriculture to also help our farmers to choose those and to make use of those. And there are so many different tools available. I've just put a picture of a couple of those. For instance, instrument to measure leaf color. Nowadays, from remote sensing, satellites, and drones, and so on, we can identify all sorts of stresses, including water stress, including nutrient stress. There's all sorts of high-tech equipment, like, for instance, here's sap flow measurement. Here is eddy covariance system to measure fluxes of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and water vapor from the crop. So we can very accurately measure how much water transpires from a crop surface. Not to say that farmers necessarily are going to use this, but this we can use as scientists to develop a more simple methods that farmers can apply. Also other simple tools like from very simple like this chameleon sensor that measures soil water content or water potential, and just by giving an indicator light of blue, the soil is wet, green, it's okay, red, it's water stressed or whatever. Two very sophisticated tools. There's so many tools in the toolbox. We must just help your farmers to make use of those in the end. And then one quick example work with that we're busy with at the moment, where we look at the potential of using satellite imagery or satellite indexes to estimate in-season canopy cover and crop coefficients in order to be able to estimate crop water use, evaporation, transpiration from a certain crop. And our aim is to build this into package it into a user-friendly scheduling tool that, for instance, will be available on your cell phone. And how can we actually develop something like that? What tells us that there's potential? Just from previous work that we've done, where we did measure NDVI for different fields, just lumped together here on the same graph over a growing season. If you plot that with green canopy cover that we measured in the field, you can see they follow a similar pattern. Fields differ slightly, but if you take one field, you pick it out and you plot the NDVI, which are the dots here, on a crop canopy, sorry, a crop factor curve, which is the red line, you can see they follow a similar trend. And this is just an example for NDVI. We can look at all sorts of different indices nowadays with satellite data becoming so much more available and more affordable. Drones and so on, so many different tools that become available to our growers. So the idea is to use NDVI data or others remote sensing data to sort of develop a dynamic day-to-day crop factor for your specific crop for that planting date, and be able to suck in weather data automatically and calculate crop water use on a daily basis, just at your fingertips on your cell phone. All right, just to summarize my whole talk then, I think you will all agree soil and water are our most precious non-renewable resources. So therefore, we really have to protect that for the future, for our people that come after us. we are in a water scarce region of the world, and the problems are just going to deteriorate with climate change. Things are just going to become more and more difficult. So we have a responsibility to use these resources more efficiently. If we look at the numbers that we've measured for our farmers, water and nutrient use efficiencies are generally good. But you will agree with me, there's definitely opportunity for improvement in efficiencies and sustainability. If you go and you look at individual farmers, there are definitely places where we can improve. And it's our job as scientists to help our producers to reach that goal. So this is just going to end off with acknowledgements. Many people involved in this work, either funding or colleagues at other universities or institutions who participated and who helped, and especially students. I've seen some of them online here. Thanks to them, and also sponsors, of course, of like Potato South Africa and Yara and so on. So thanks a lot, and you're welcome if we get to questions. If you have more, I can elaborate if you have questions on some of these. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, it is quite impressive to see your students here on a Friday afternoon. That's always good. So, Alriza, I don't know how we should do it now, but maybe we can take questions if people have questions. I see there was one in the box about why do we have resistance, and I think there's many reasons, but I think it's older products are overused and used incorrectly. That's what we see. And I think it's also important that people that they do rotate and maybe try and, this is something we've been trying to do, is to get areas to rotate the same actives, or same groups at least, at the same time, but that is going to be a struggle. I realize that. But yeah, I don't know if there's questions or comments that people might have. I know we are a bit over time, but I'm sure there's a few minutes.
Yes, I think perhaps if anyone has a question, they can also just raise their hands and I can contact them. Otherwise, they can just put it in the chat box. Perhaps you can give a minute. But thank you very much in the meantime while we wait, to our speakers and Dirk for putting this together. Really appreciate it. As I also mentioned in the text box, anyone who would like to do the CPD module, it's only for CPD participants, but it is in category 2 on the CPD system. Thank you very much for giving us those questions as well to our presenters. We appreciate it. And then it doesn't look like there are any questions at this stage.
Okay. So yeah, but maybe just a comment from my side, and I want to put the invitation out there that from an industry side, and I know from Potato South Africa side, we also try and work together with other industries. Particularly, Martin mentioned about the fact that we don't use all the nitrogen and we leave it to our colleagues in the grain industry often. But it's really important that we try and work together, and there is an initiative and that we're trying to coordinate through also the University of Pretoria to share data, for example, trapping data, disease data, so we can build these platforms, and that's really what we want to try and achieve also in our app, is to make big time data available for everybody, so each crop protection agent can make better predictions and in that way help his farmer a bit more. So if there's interest, maybe we reach out to us and download that app. That's what the base will be in the future for us. So
fantastic. Thank you, Dirk. I think with that, we can, if there aren't any other comments from any of the presenters, then with that, I think we can start the weekend.
Okay, and thanks everybody, and yeah, for your interest in the potatoes. We appreciate that.
Thank you very much. Thanks all our presenters.
Martin and Lindy and FP also from your side. Thanks.
Okay, amongst the saints.
Have a nice weekend. Bye.
Bye.